In this video, we are going to discuss the properties of quadrilaterals. The trapezium, the parallelogram, the rectangle, the square, the rhombus, and the kite. I want you to note that the rhombus, the square, the rectangle, and the parallelogram are all in blue. There's a reason for that. So why do we need to know these properties? The more properties we know, the more equipped we are to solve problems, and that's exciting. So let's look at the length of the sides. If you measure the sides with a ruler, you will see the sides of a trapezium will all be different in length. However, in a parallelogram, you will see that the opposite sides are equal in length, and we use these little short lines as a symbol to indicate that. Now, since the rectangle is a type of parallelogram, the opposite pairs of sides are also equal. The square is also a type of parallelogram, so the opposite sides are equal, but the square is more special than that. The sides are also, all the sides are equal. The rhombus is a parallelogram and the opposite sides are equal, but just like the square, all the sides are equal. So note the similarities and the differences. Now, poor old Kite. Kite is like the rebel in math land. If you look at the opposite sides are not equal. However, the adjacent sides are equal. Now, what are adjacent sides? Adjacent sides are sides which share the same vertex. Now, let's look at sides and whether they are parallel. Now, remember, sides are parallel if they always are the same distance from each other. It's not about their lengths, it's the distance between them. So they will never intersect. We use these arrows to show parallel lines. So the trapezium only has got one pair of opposite sides that are parallel. What about the parallelogram? Well, the parallelogram has got two pairs and the opposite pairs are parallel. Make sure that you use two arrows, because we cannot, if we only use one arrow here, it means this and this side are parallel, and that's not the truth. The rectangle is a type of parallelogram, therefore the opposite sides are parallel. The square is a type of parallelogram, therefore the opposite sides are parallel. And the rhombus is a type of parallelogram, therefore the opposite sides are parallel. But poor old Kite, the rebel again. Are there any sides that are parallel? No. But remember, the adjacent sides are equal. Let's look at the angles. The trapezium, all these angles will have different sizes. But if we add all the interior angles of any of these quadrilaterals, then it will add up to 360 degrees. Let's look at parallelogram. A parallelogram, your opposite angles. Now, opposite angles means those two angles. They are equal. If you don't have color to indicate it, we usually use a little symbol like one curve for these two and two curvy lines for those opposite angles. Now, since the rectangle is a parallelogram, the opposite angles are also equal, but it's even more special because all the angles are 90 degrees. And what is 4 times 90? 360. The square is a type of rectangle, and it's also a parallelogram because the opposite angles are equal. But similar to the rectangle, all the angles are 90 degrees. That happens if then the rhombus. In the rhombus, the opposite angles are equal, just like the parallelogram. Poor old Kite, our rebel. there's only one pair of opposite angles that are equal. If you look at this, you will see that this angle is an obtuse angle and this angle is an acute angle. They are definitely not equal. What about the diagonals? What is a diagonal? If you connect two angles with a straight line, then it's called a diagonal. So there's one diagonal and another diagonal. Now in a trapezium, something happens if two diagonals cut each other. They cut each other in half. We say the two diagonals bisect each other. The word bi means two. So say for example from here to there it's 10 centimeters, then from the midpoint to the opposite angle it will also be 10 centimeters. And say for example from there to there it's 5 centimeters, from midpoint to the opposite angle will also be 5 centimeters. Okay, so what's going to happen in a rectangle? Well, a rectangle is a parallelogram, so the diagonals will also bisect each other. But since there are 90-degree angles here, it means the diagonals are equal in length. The square is also a parallelogram, so the diagonals bisect each other. And the diagonals bisect each other equally, since the square also has got 90-degree angles. But there's something special happening here. These diagonals bisect each other at 90-degree angles. Let's look at the rhombus. The rhombus is a parallelogram, so the diagonals bisect each other. Not equally, like in the square or the rectangle, but also at right angles, similar to the square. Kite, our poor rebel, what's happening there? Kite, yes, you've got a diagonal and another one. But the one diagonal will bisect the shorter one. So the long diagonal, this one, bisects the shorter one at right angles. So do you see this kite always just wants to be different to the others, which is fine. I call these four parallelograms, these four shapes, the famous four, because they share four characteristics, namely opposite sides are equal and parallel, opposite angles are equal, and the diagonals bisect each other. So this is a summary of all the properties. Guys, you will be able to solve lots of problems if you know the properties of quadrilaterals. The only way to learn it is to sit on your butt, draw, talk until you've memorized it. It's always good on a grade 8 level to summarize quadrilaterals in a Venn diagram. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions and you're just going to say yes or no. Does this mean that parallelograms, rhombi, squares, rectangles, kites and trapeziums are all quadrilaterals? Yes, they are, because they all have four sides and four angles. Does it mean that the rhombus, the square and the rectangle, they are all also parallelograms? Yes, because of those four characteristics. All four of these shapes share the same characteristics, namely opposite sides are equal and parallel, opposite angles are equal, and the diagonals bisect each other. Is a square a special rhombus? Yes, because the square has got one extra property, namely all the angles are 90 degrees. Is a square also a type of rectangle? Yes, a square is also a type of rectangle, but it's got an extra property, namely that all the sides are equal. So we can say that all squares, can we say that all rhombi are squares, or can we say that all squares are also rhombi? We can say that all squares are also rhombi and all squares are also rectangles, but all rectangles are not squares.